Okay, you make the
Good morning, Sandra and Bill.
You make the 2-mile drive in about an hour time, I believe. What happened on Wednesday inside the Situation Room?
Well, you saw the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, try to give a presentation to explain just how serious the problems are at the border and just how many violent criminals try to come across and, in fact, do come across. Some are arrested and stopped. Many actually get through bringing drugs, bringing other crimes. We saw a cop get murdered last week. Every single time Secretary Nielsen tried to give that presentation and point to the facts that are happening at the border, she was interrupted by both Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi multiple times. They didn't want to hear the facts. I hope we can actually get into a serious discussion about how to solve the crisis at the border.
And that's why we brought you on today. Nancy Pelosi has the gavel. Other than that, which is a big difference, but other than that, what's different between Wednesday and today, Friday morning?
Well, the vote for Speaker is behind Nancy Pelosi. Surely there were some concerns. I mean, she only got 220 votes. She needed 218, so she barely got across the finish line there. But at the end of the day, now she's the Speaker. But we still have a Republican Senate. President Trump has still been very clear about why he's trying to secure the border and what it's going to take to secure the border. And that's really what this negotiation should be about. Not about a dollar figure. The dollar figure is really about what it's going to take to keep the border secure. And if they don't want to secure the border, they need to be real clear with the American people. But they can't come in and say they want to secure the border, but they refuse to appropriate any of the dollars it'll take to secure the border.
You know, I just wonder what sort of pressure is getting put on the Senate side, on Mitch McConnell, who has stood firm on saying that he will not take up anything that doesn't include funding for the president's border wall. But a couple of Republicans have started to come out, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins, putting pressure on McConnell to open the government, do what it takes to open the government. We'll deal with this later. Are you seeing that pressure on McConnell? What's happening on the Senate side?
Well, keep in mind, and, you know, Senator McConnell's been very clear, he's not going to bring a bill to the Senate floor that the president's not going to sign because that's not going to solve the problem. But President Trump brought this up last year. And let's go back to the omnibus bill last year, where President Trump said that he was going to sign the bill, but he wasn't going to do that again, that he was going to finally want to address this problem. And so for a year, we've seen a year go by and absolutely no negotiations. Then we had the impasse and we had a shutdown. And over Christmas, President Trump stayed in the White House and said, let's negotiate. And not one day during that 2-week period did Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer try to negotiate. Now they want to say, let's go for another 2 weeks. At some point, we've got to confront this crisis at our border and why we have this crisis at the border. There's a bit, look, think about this. Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi passed a bill out of the House that will actually send taxpayer money to foreign governments to provide abortion, yet she won't support money to actually go to the Department of Homeland Security to keep our border safe in America. That's what happened on the House floor yesterday. There's a clear difference in priorities, and it's going to have to come to a head. It has come to a head. Now let's get a resolution and solve this problem.
There's a different environment in Washington, as you know, and you could probably feel it yourself. A few Democratic members of the Congress, of the House, they filed impeachment articles yesterday. I don't know where that goes. Nancy Pelosi addressed it and said basically it's a political issue and we're going to wait for the Mueller report to come out. The president responded to that. He sent out this tweet, number 5, guys. Here he said, how do you impeach a president who has won perhaps the greatest election of all time, done nothing wrong, no collusion with Russia? It was the Dems that colluded. The most successful first 2 years of any president is the most popular Republican in party history, 93%. Where do you think they go with this?
Well, clearly you see that the far left elements of Nancy Pelosi's majority want to go to impeachment or are already threatening that, and some of them using profanities and incredibly inappropriate tone in Washington to make their point. But they telegraphed this before the election. They said ultimately they would go towards impeachment, even if there's no evidence. Look, this Mueller probe's been going on for a long, long time, and it was all supposed to be about finding collusion, and we've seen no collusion with Russia. We've did an investigation in the House, and there was none shown. Mueller hasn't shown any, and we know that place leaks like a sieve. So if there's collusion, they need to show it, but if not, it's time to move on, and Democrats need to confront this growing movement on the radical left side that wants to impeach no matter what, wants to harass the president no matter what. He was duly elected. He's trying to do the job he was elected to do, and part of it is to secure this country's border.
As you well know, some of them are itching to do it. Go ahead, Sandra.
The new Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib You referenced profanity. This is an example of some of what we have heard on calls for impeachment of the president. She said, quote, "When your son looks at you and says, 'Mama, look, you won, bullies didn't win,' and I said, 'Baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there and we're going to impeach the,'" and that is where the expletive is. She has responded to that, by the way, Congressman, just a few moments ago. She tweeted out from her own account, "This is not just about Donald Trump. This is about all of us. In the face of this constitutional crisis, we must rise. I will always speak truth to power," she tweeted. Hashtag unapologetically me. Just want to know your thoughts on what this new Congress may look like and the decorum.
Well, there's no place for that kind of rhetoric. And look, during Barack Obama's tenure, there were a lot of policy disagreements myself and many of my colleagues had with him. We never used that kind of language. And frankly, when people brought those kind of words to the forefront, we called it out. They need to call it out on their side. She ought to apologize for it. That's not the way to address her differences with President Trump. She'll have many opportunities to do it. That's not the way to handle it. She should apologize. But the Democrats on their side should call that kind of language out as well.
Well, apparently she's not going to. So where does that leave your argument?
Well, in the end, we're still going to fight for the principles that we believe in. President Trump is still carrying out his duty as commander-in-chief to keep this country safe. This is about keeping the country safe. It's not about a dollar figure. The Department of Homeland Security has said what it's going to take to keep the country safe, and ultimately that number for this year is $5.6 billion. If they've got a better way to keep the country safe, they ought to put that idea on the table today. They can't come and say they're not going to support the amount it's going to take to keep the country safe and say they're for border security at the same time.
Last question, sir.
Do you think that there'll be a different strategy in that room today? How is today at the White House, this meeting, how is it going to be different from Wednesday?
Well, hopefully the Democrats have some kind of alternative. We passed a bill last Congress that laid out how to keep the government open and secure the border that the president would sign. They didn't want to negotiate off of that number. The president has acknowledged multiple times that he's willing to negotiate, but they've refused. So at some point, they're going to have to want to be at the table negotiating. Hopefully today we get closer to that point.
You're in the minority now. And one thing you learn in Washington, D.C. is that when you're in a minority, you don't have much of a leg to stand on.
Well, we still ultimately can help provide.
This is what I'm trying to get at here. The question is, you and the minority party now, what can you accomplish over the next 2 years?
Well, there are going to be a lot of opportunities where we can work together. Here is a clear example. Nancy Pelosi is not going to be able to just ram through her ideas like yesterday of not funding the wall but funding abortion in foreign countries. That's not going to get signed by the president. Ultimately, when an agreement's going to get done, she's going to have to work with Republicans, both in the House and the Senate. So look at last Congress. There were probably 70% of the bills that we passed that got signed into law were bipartisan. There were clear partisan fights like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which worked, by the way, to help get our economy going and start rebuilding our middle class. But that was partisan. Most of the issues that we got to the president's desk from opioid crisis resolution and others were bipartisan.
Unfortunately, they don't make headlines. But, sir, thank you for coming on today and being